Today on the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, you will see how to make a mallet from a hardwood burl.
The Appalachian area is comprised of 13 eastern states covering 205,000 square miles of rugged, mountainous terrain. It stretches from New York to Mississippi, with West Virginia being the only state totally encased in the area. When this region was first settled, the immigrants had to travel over the Appalachian mountain range with only what they could carry or haul by wagons. They would make furniture and other wooden items that were necessary and functional. When our Appalachian forefathers needed a new Burl mallet or maul, they would gather their double bit axe, making sure it was sharp, and head into the woods. They would begin to look for a burl growing on a hardwood tree. The size and the shape would have to be just right to serve their purpose. When they found one, they would examine it closely to see if it was hollow or punky or contained any foreign matter. A small burl would be used to produce a mallet, whereas a large burl would be used for a maul or split to make several tools. A mallet is used in the shop with small hand tools when a small amount of force is needed, but a maul is used when brute force is needed on larger tasks. Harvesting a burl is very labor-intensive and hard work, typical of many of the Appalachian chores. It was a very hard lifestyle. A burl is used for mallets and mauls because the grain is interlocked, woven together, so it will last much longer than straight-grained wood. Metal was a precious commodity, so care was taken to never strike metal on metal. It would damage or mushroom the tool. With wood striking the metal, there is no damage to the metal. The wood gives before the metal, and wood was more readily available and easier to work than metal. If the burl was small enough and on a small tree, then they would be able to cut and harvest it by carrying it out. But if it was a large burl or on a large tree, then they would have to use livestock, ox, mules, or horses, to retrieve it. Once the burl is on the ground, they could examine it and head back to the shop to make a new burl mallet or burl maul. Today I'm here on Mud River Road in Cabell County, West Virginia with Grant Stratton. We're at his dad's place, Mike Stratton's property. Nice old house here. Grant, I'd like to thank you for allowing us to come here.
No problem.
Can you tell our viewers a little bit about your background, your education?
Well, sure. Starting out in the early 2000s after high school, went into Glenville State College up in the middle part of West Virginia. They have a forestry program and happened to adopt a natural resource management program as well that I was interested in. And during those years there, I developed a love for the forest more than I knew I was going to like at the time. And then it came to be that when they adopted the natural resource management program, I was able to do the 2-year forestry with a 2-year natural resource, which in return gives a 4-year background. And then from there, I saw a lot of just logging and timbering that I wanted to do myself due to the bad name and bad background that logging does have, and there is a brighter side of logging.
I wonder if we could start out by just telling our viewers what is a burl.
Well, a burl, can be many things. It's really an unknown fact of exactly how it's caused, because it could be insect disease, there's a bacteria, it could be environmental factors as far as other trees or other just objects out there going through the air that has bruise or hit the skin of that tree, and then now it's creating a spot to where it's more or less going to put an emphasis on to almost put a Band-Aid on to heal itself, but it's not healing itself, it's actually creating a growth that this growth is almost living, almost parasitic-like off of this tree, but it doesn't really harm the tree. And the tree continues to grow, and for many years, and this burl will have a maturity to it at the same time.
So it's something that causes a stress in the tree, and then the cells abnormally grow.
More or less.
So with the burl, you don't have the nice straight grain. All of the grain is intertwined and locked, and that makes it very hard and unique.
I mean, some of them are round, some of them will be round with warts all over them kind of style, knotted up, and some will be large and small, just areas, as it kind of just ripples its way back to the stem.
Some will have little eyes in it, almost like a bird's eye. And of course, a lot of them, the color changes. The color is different in the burl than it is from the heartwood of the tree.
Yes.
So there's a little difference there.
Depending on the size of your stem as well. On that trunk, I noticed when you were speaking of heartwood, because some of these burls, you take a 6-inch or 8-inch diameter sugar maple, and then it'll blow up a giant burl.
Yes.
That's almost wanting to lean this tree, but not quite. But it's making this tree, it's definitely anchoring it to the ground. Yeah. But you got to think it's 6 inches with a burl bigger than a basketball.
Well, let's talk about some of the uses for the burls. Today, some of the really good solid burls, large burls, they get sent to specialty mills where they will mill them very, very thin in veneer, and then that's used in fine furniture or decorative. Burls are really prized. Most of the people I know that buy them by the weight instead of the board feet.
Yes.
Because it's so odd in shape, and they go by weight.
Yes. Yeah. And it still could be a pig in a poke then.
It is. You never know.
Until you crack one open.
Yeah, it's like a Christmas present. You don't know what's inside. You can look all around and you may have an idea, but until you actually make your first cut, you have no idea what the inside is like. Well, what I'd like to do now, Grant, is let's go over here and look at some of these burls that we have, what they look like, and some of their uses. This looks like a oak burl.
Yep, it's a white oak burl.
White oak.
Yeah, off the base, next to the roots, actually, underneath when I was putting a notch in one, I found it.
Let's turn it over and see what it looks like.
It's on a downhill slope on a sunny side of a hill.
How old is it?
I'd give it about a 30-year-old burl right there. Yeah, it was on probably about I'd say a 90 to 120-year-old tree.
Now I've seen where they have taken ones like this, slightly bigger, and they would take a draw knife and shave this down to make a handle, and then this would be the head of a mallet.
And just use
and
that
they would
straight.
Use it like this.
Just naturally.
Because the grain here is all knotted and tight and very dense, so it doesn't tear up very much when you use it as a mallet. And
Absolutely.
when they do finally wear out, they would just go get another.
13, 14 years ago, right before I started harvesting timber, I noticed all these funky growths on trees, and being into forestry, you learn it all, but we're after markets, and we're after logs and fine retail of the lumber and veneer out of the raw product of a log. So I started talking to some folks and off TV, and they're called burls, and inside these burls is beautiful wood. It's another large burl. This is one of
what species?
Larger. This is a black oak species.
Black oak.
Yes, sir. The round part is still going into the burl.
Yeah.
And it could be even older, than the 45 mark, or. So, I mean, it just depends. A lot of them mature. I mean, they can mature up to 60 years, they say. This was in the house when we were tearing it down. Nobody knows what the use was. The farmer or whoever the designer, inventor, the maker, he had a purpose for it. They've shoved cloth in for the handle, is how it's secured in there. And then,
so it's definitely old, and it was probably made with hand tools.
Yes.
And I can tell by the size that it was made for something that they needed a lot of force.
Yes.
If they didn't need that much force, it would have been much smaller.
It's either been a knot off a tree, or it could be a burl itself. It's just squared up, however they had done it with their hand tool at the time.
The handle, you can tell by the shape and looking at it, that it hasn't been turned. It's been done with probably a draw knife.
That's what I was thinking.
And if you notice all the little wormholes, so this right here is probably a small limb or sapling that they just cut and stripped and used it for the handle.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what the species is on that?
Yeah, it's
kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, it looks like it's actually a hickory, it seems to be, yes.
It doesn't matter if you're using hand tools or machinery. In woodworking, you need to know how to safely use your equipment. When creating dust, make certain you have good cross ventilation, a dust collection system, or a dust respirator. If you're applying a finish, please use a NIOSH approved respirator for that particular chemical. A good set of hearing protection is necessary to protect your hearing. And of course, eye protection is a must. Welcome to the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop. Today we'll be discussing burls and Burl mallets. Stay tuned. This is a burl that a friend gave to me. It was cut about 5 to 7 years ago, and it actually looks like it may be 2 burls. There's a little bit of inclusion here, which is where the 2 have grown together, and a little bit of inclusion over here. Because of that, I have checked it with a metal detector to make sure there's no hidden metal down in here. And because of that, I'll be cutting this with an old chain on my saw. It's also got quite a bit of surface checking, and it's a little punky right in here and down in here. And if I turn it over, you can see where the 2 have sort of blended together right through here. So I'm kind of anxious to cut this open and see what it's like. Sometimes it's hard to see the grain when it's dry, so you can put alcohol or water on it, and that sort of accentuates the grain and makes it easier to see the grain. That looks real good right there. This one looks pretty good. It's got a little bit of a check there and there. The inclusion did not go very far, so that's good. So I think I can use those for a lathe project. Now I'm going to take this burl and slice part of it off on the bandsaw, trying to get it down to a manageable size so I can put it on the lathe. Now you can see a lot of the pieces I've cut away from the burl to get a good square piece of burl that's fairly stable. This is what I'll turn on the lathe to get a mallet head. Now I want to run this over the joiner to give me a good flat surface, and then I'll run it over the joiner again to get a surface that's 90 degrees to that one. That way it'll be easier for me to find the center and get the largest mallet head I can out of this. Okay, I've already got the curly maple set up on the lathe here. As you can see, I've knocked off the corners on the table saw first. And I've got the tool rest set up, and I'm going to turn this to round, and then I'll put the tenon on it. Okay, now I want to measure back the distance of the mortise I've already made in the block of the burl. So I want to measure back that amount and mark for my tenon. So to mark for my tenon, I've used a depth gauge to measure the mortise in the burl. So now I'm going to measure how far down to start my tenon. Just drilled a hole through the tenon and need to make sure that it is perpendicular to the grain and not parallel with the grain. So now I'm going to take it over to the bandsaw and put a slice down to the hole. Okay, I'm going to cut the end of my tenon off so it's the right length. Anytime you're working with round stock, you need a cradle block. And now I'm going to cut a slice right up the middle of the tenon up to the hole I drilled on the drill press. This is where the wedge will go. Now to create the wedge that goes into the cut on the tenon, I prefer to take a piece of 1/8 inch hardwood. This is cherry, real long strips, so I got plenty of room to hold on to it. And I like to use a belt sander just to taper it down to the wedge shape that I need. Today I'm going to make a mallet. I'm going to replace this one that's worn out pretty bad. This is a piece of burl, maple burl, which will be the head of the mallet, and then curly maple will be the handle. And what I'm getting ready to do is glue the handle into the head of the mallet, and I'm going to use what's called a foxtail mortise and tenon. As you can see, I've turned the tenon already and drilled the hole, and it does fit in there. And what I've done is drilled a small hole here, 1/8 of an inch, and then sliced on the bandsaw down to the hole. The hole will stop the wood from splitting any further. And then I made a small wedge out of cherry. And as this drives in, the wedge will drive in and it will spread it and it will fit tighter. It's a mechanical fit, but I'm also going to use some epoxy to glue it in place, and it's some slow setting epoxy. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that now. I need to get my gloves on. Now this epoxy is mixed 2-to-1 ratio. So I've got a container here and a measuring cups. When this mixes, it is an exothermic reaction, so it will get a little warm. Now I'm going to use a little nail to stir it up. And again, this is slow setting epoxy. It'll take it about 8 hours to set up. It will also fill the gaps that are existing from where I put the wedge in. So now I need to just apply it inside the mortise. Now the thing about this joint is you pretty much get one shot at it, because as you drive it in, the wedge goes in and spreads the tenon. And since it is a mechanical joint, it does not come back apart. So you better make sure you have everything set up and ready. I like to measure using a set of calipers, and I'll go ahead and put the wedge in, spread it, which spreads it a little bit, and then I can measure how much it spreads to make sure I've got the right amount. Now what I want to do is put it in a clamp. So now I'm going to set that aside and just let that dry. And after it sets up, tomorrow I'll put that on the lathe and turn the handle to its final shape and turn the mallet to its final shape. Now I've mounted the piece in the lathe and I'm ready to turn it. I like to use a roughing gouge to slowly turn the taper, the transition taper from the mallet head to the handle. Then I reshape the handle to a comfortable fit for a hand. The drive spur is in a recessed hole drilled in the end of the Burl Mallet head. Later I'll turn a medallion and stick into the hole. As you can see, I've finished the Burl Mallets. Now I'm ready to apply a finish. Since there will be a lot of force on this, I do not want a film finish, so I'm going to apply an oil varnish blend. And I've got my gloves on, and what you want to do is just flood this. You want it to soak in as much as possible and keep it wet so it continues to soak in. And this really accentuates the grain, the burl, and the curly maple handle. I turned a medallion and had it engraved, and that's set into the head. Adds a little bit of a touch. Now what I need to do is just keep that wet. Now I'll probably give this about 3 or 4 coats of this oil varnish blend. There's no collaring added to this, and this one has a medallion in the end of it also. So now I just need to let that set and soak in. Keep it wet. The end grain really soaks this up fast, so you've got to make sure you have plenty applied on the end grain. Now after about 15 minutes, I'll give it another coat while it's still wet, and then after about 15 minutes, then I'll wipe off the excess and I'll let it set for an hour or 2 and give it another coat. Thanks for watching the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop. For more information on today's project, go to AppalachianHeritageWoodshop.com. Be proud of your Appalachian heritage.
The Appalachian Heritage Woodshop is brought to you by Christian Internet Services, common sense internet marketing and web design. Our internet marketing commissions are based on results. Robinson and McElwee, thinking business, practicing law. Heritage Farm Museum and Village. Experience the past, appreciate today, dream for the future.